Hey, my name is Ramirez, um, Frog Bear. You can also call me Rami. Um, Now, if you thought my last video was bad, trust me. My little deep dive into the medical field was far more expansive and far more outreaching than I could ever want to imagine and or believe. So now, definitions, definitions, and defining the world around us. Now, this gets into a very Orwellian aspect of life and understanding what, right? How do we define the things that we do? How do we define the systems that we interact with, right? We may not see them as systems, but an example of this, a very quick one, would be the making the distinction of the just knowing the differences, right? We have two different fruits. We can have a peach and we can have an apple. Both of them ferment, both of them rot, but there's a difference between them as fruit, but they still have the same systems of fermentation and rotting that are involved, right? So the idea of what that system is what you call cybernetics. So when you see the word cybernetics, it doesn't necessarily mean anything that relating to like computers and or any of that. It mainly relates to systems and how, like, even transitory systems, right? Like if you hang out in the sun too long and you turn darker, right? That's a transitory sort of system. And where all this was defined, let me make sure that I have the correct, was through cybernetics. Now, a form factor of cybernetics, I'll start with making a bit of a distinction between this video.
Going to talk about the great and almighty Netflix.
Great and almighty.
Man, they running the show. But then I found out the secrets.
What's the secret?
His great uncle was Edward Bernays, and he was the guy who invented propaganda.
Sigmund Freud's sister, Anna Freud, gave birth to Freud's nephew, Edward.
I also want to highlight the fact that science is very familial. It is very close to home. You'll notice that a lot of people that who were very early scientists in this game and who were very early pioneers in this field still have children who are very up there in the echelon ranks of our oligarchs, our aristocrats, whatever we want to call this upper echelon of people. But let's continue.
Bernays, the father of propaganda. Bernays took his family's work in psychology and used it to help governments and corporations manipulate the minds of the public. Bernays manipulated women into buying more cigarettes by convincing them that smoking was a form of feminist liberation.
That's crazy.
And turned people into mindless consumers.
Now, I'm not going to say that propaganda or psychology is a part of this. I'm just saying that this is merely one piece to a larger puzzle, right? Because how do you understand how to subvert a human being's expectations, or how to subvert a human being into these loops of systems? But I'm going to continue.
Is it any surprise, then, that the great-nephew of Edward Bernays is none other than Mark Bernays Randolph?
What a coincidence.
The co-founder and original CEO of Netflix.
Who better can manipulate the masses than Netflix? The CEO of Netflix, he's from Freud. He's a
Not only is he a Freudian, it's just he's from that lineage of family. I just merely want to point out that it's not that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It's more that these people groom their kids. They put their kids on game. They make sure that they maintain their position of status, is what I'm saying.
Freudian to talk about the great and almighty.
Oop, okay, wrong one. Now, to the next thing that I'm going to point to is cybernetics, the thought collective. Let me make sure that this isn't cropped out. Now I merely just pointed, I got this article from, it says at the top, it's cut off, let me see. University of Illinois. It's the University Library, University of Illinois, at Urbana Campaign. Now here, I'm just going to read the beginning article here, or at least the beginning paragraph, to make sure that it's legible here on the computer. Between 1946 and 1953, the Josiah Macy's, yes, Macy, like Macy's, the stores, Junior Foundation hosted 10 conferences, by the way, of which the first 5 aren't documented at all. It's only the last half that are documented, and what do you call it? When you got that person typing out everything that everybody says. All but one New York City that brought together a diverse group of scholars representing fields from mathematics to physical life, social, and information science, known as the Macy Conference on Curricular, Causal, and Feedback Mechanisms in Biological and Social Systems. Very interesting, don't you think? The post-war meeting initially sought to bridge disciplinary divides by using applied science to synthesize ideas, knowledge around questions about behavior and information feedback. This is, I don't know, like, if this isn't painting a very dark picture yet, just wait. For both organisms and machines. After MIT mathematician Norbert Wiener published Cybernetics in 1948, conference participants adopted the term cybernetics as the umbrella under which their interconnected and interdisciplinary web of ideas gained meaning. This is also largely where they started defining certain things. They started defining certain systems that we naturally live in. Has been defined in many ways as the science of communication and control, or steermanship, in organisms and machines, Wiener, 1948. As the study of form and pattern, Baston, 1972, or as quite simply the study of behavior. Quote, Cybernetics treats not things but ways of behaving. It does not ask what is that thing, but what does it do? Ashby, 1956. Cybernetics thus provided participants with a common language to articulate and discuss similar questions about behavior or ways of behaving across disciplines, regardless of whether the subject of the study was animal, machine, or social phenomena. They had a very large obsession with making sure how they understood our social behaviors, our social patterns, and they had a very vested interest in making sure that things went accordingly to the way they wanted to shape things. That's what I believe. That's my opinion, by the way. In many ways, cybernetics began in New York City, spread across the world, Just making sure that I don't need anything here. But MIT is very involved in this. And the Media Labs portion of it was very well. I didn't even know that Media Labs existed for this long, is what I'm saying. Because if anybody doesn't know, MIT Media Labs recently had a big scandal involving somebody named Joy Ito, who was taking money from a very famous philanthropist, for those who don't know. Moving on. Found an article that also describes how the Macy's conference shaped the future. Read how getting people working on the edge of their disciplines together unleashed new thought paradigms, transformed entire disciplines, and fueled decades of innovation. At the Radical Macy's conference in New York, 1940s, neuropsychologist Warren McCullough's job was to ensure that disciplinary boundaries were not followed. Boundaries were not followed. The idea behind the conference was simple. Bring the best minds working at the edge of their disciplines to talk about our future. Right? Getting all the best minds together. The Macy's conference influenced the internet, redefined social systems, psychology, neuroscience, and informatics for decades to come. It was perhaps the first academic exercise in true transdisciplinary. I don't even know. Transdisciplinary. Interesting. The information was born. How information was born. my brain is losing it a bit. The Macy's conference were set up to push the frontiers of medical research and develop a unified theory of the human mind. Invitees would not present their research or explore their domain expertise. Instead, they would discuss their work in progress and develop an epistemology that did not exist. The concept of information, so ubiquitous now, was born here. Keep in mind, listen here. Psychologists, anthropologists, neuroscientists, and mathematicians sat down to discuss what information meant to each of them in their domains, and develop a common vocabulary to understand what the concept meant and how it was changing over time. This allowed them to transcend disciplinary boundaries to develop new ways of seeing what was coming, the information revolution that was going to transform the world. Essentially, they got together and discovered that the words and terms that they were using for each respective field meant something different to each other. So, for a while, they actually had to come to terms and agreement with, if I use this word, but this word means something else for you and your discipline and your field, how do we bridge that gap? How do we bridge that gap of information? A radical theory of regulation and control, using new terms such as information, feedback, analog and digital, the participants tried to develop a universal theory of regulation and control, applicable to living beings as well as to machines, to economic as well as to mental processes, and to sociological as well as to aesthetic phenomena. The concept changed thinking in such diverse fields as biology, neurology, sociology, language studies, computer science, psychoanalysis, ecology, politics, and economy. Right? They reached a wide variety of things. It created new methodologies in each discipline and opened space for interpretive inquiry in an interconnected system, something that was a result of putting the human next to the machine and interrogating both thoroughly. This is how cybernetics and cognitive science were born. They were born as twins. Now, these are some of the people that were invited. There were a lot more people invited to this conference, but she's only showing half. Using technology, art, and design. Playing the role of professional catalyst made John Brockman a superstar. Long before he joined the legendary MIT Media Labs, he was an established literary agent who brought together the worlds of arts and science together, putting seemingly irreconcilable worlds in conversation, evident even today in the brilliant content theedge.org produces. Either way. He was buddies with Andy Warhol and Bob Dylan, known for going around circles that never otherwise intersected, right? He was somebody that spoke to a variety of different people. Nothing really stopped him. The barrier of, oh, he's in a different field, or the barrier of they have different ideas. That's what they're highlighting. The story goes that Brockman was given a copy of Weiner's Cybernetics by Stuart Brand. Both read the book cover to cover in the following days. Brockman says that it changed his life. There were sowed the seeds of the third culture as a literary genre, along with the science fiction as a new form of writing. He was called upon the MIT to organize meetings between those who did the arts and the scientists. He founded the Whole Earth Catalog, a collection of alternative products and innovative technologies that were cutting edge. What the MIT Media Labs would become as a center full of diverse creative geniuses who did technology, art, and design under one roof and innovate far ahead than what the world could fathom, goes back to the foundation head. Right? He was very much influenced by cybernetics. Implementing Apple and postmodernism and beyond. Do I want to read this? Formative years. Robert, philosopher Gilles Deleuze, to socialist Jean-Foucault Letort, all owe the dazzling success to the epoch changing shifts that Macy enabled. thinking of information in systems through feedback, neurological networks, and nature of information gave birth to Weiner's path-breaking book, Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and in the Machine, that would create a new field of inquiry altogether. The idea was to arrive at principles of behavior and information feedback that would apply to organisms, machines, and social systems. Socialist Jean-Francis traced the development and characteristics of the new information society that followed from industrial society in this book, The Postmodern Condition, a report on knowledge. He examined how, for the first time, whoever controlled data banks and communication systems would rule the world. Should I reread that one more time? The first time, whoever controlled data banks, right, bases that collect information, and communication systems would rule the world. Mainstream media, for those who can't guess it. Years before business and thinkers hit the realization, Gilles Deleuze became possibly the most radical French philosopher to write about societies of control that followed industrial society, worrying about issues such as surveillance in technology, advanced states. It would be an understatement to say that the future was crafted at the Macy's conference. Either way, there's cognitive systems have an inside and outside. Representation. Organisms map external objects to internal state. Memory. Nervous system stores information of reality, and truth exists in the world. Epistemology. Intelligence resides in manipulation of information and how they overlap with one another. I can't get into it because I don't want the video to be too long. Lessons for the fourth industrial revolution. The human as we know it is fraying at the cusp of new technological transformations as we grapple with the questions of human, artificial, material, abstract, subject, object. We can learn much from what happened in those 10 years. We need to come up with methods and techniques of engagement that foster newer understanding of what makes us human. What is consciousness, and how do we understand the world we are going to inhabit? As computer scientist and philosopher ponder on what intelligence and artificial means, we need mathematicians, ethicists, designers, and psychologists to get together and create new forms of thought and praxis and pave the way for tomorrow. Macy seems like a good place to look back to look ahead. Essentially, if we want to break apart the world that we're currently living in, we have to look at what occurred at this Macy's conference, what they came up with, what were the ideas that they propagated, or what were the ideas that they fostered and gave birth to, since essentially they shaped our future as we know it today. Now, I do have a video that explains this. Well, there's also a comment here that explains this fairly well, which I should fix real quickly to make sure that you guys can read it. Sorry if you couldn't read the last article, I just didn't even realize that. Cybernetics is transdisciplinary approach for exploring regulatory systems, their structures, constraints, and possibilities. In the 21st century, the term is often used in a rather loose way to imply control of any system using technology. Cybernetics is relevant to the study of systems such as mechanical, physical, biological, cognitive, and social systems. Cybernetics is applicable when a system being analyzed incorporates a closed signaling loop, that is, where action by the system generates some change in its environment, and that change is reflected in that system in some manner. Feedback that triggers a system change, originally referred to as a circular causal relationship. And that was just a really good comment that I read.
Cybernetics must thus be defined as the study of systems that are open to energy but are closed to information and control. In the 1960s, Stafford Beer took many ideas of previous cyberneticians and put them together to create management cybernetics, the science of effective organization. Beer's main applications started in the world of business and management in general.
Right? Somebody saw that they can use this applicable science and that they could use it in a corporate setting, use it in a way to manage resource, in this case, managers, people, workers, employees.
Shown here is his groundbreaking application of an operations room in Chile in 1973. A fascinating story. Much of management cybernetics is based on Ashby's law of requisite variety. You can look for that in YouTube also. I have used
And that was his explanation, but I also found a different person who also explains it better too.
Yes, I'll tell you a very simple example of requisite variety is that if you have a light switch, the light switch has the necessary variety to switch the light on and off, but it cannot possibly alter the intensity of the light. If you want to do that, you have to add a resistance to the switch, and with that you increase the varieties possible in the switch in order to control the varieties in what you're controlling.
He's describing two laws that came about out of cybernetics. One of them is the on and off state, but then there's also a different kind of state that requires, he explains it a bit further, which is adding a resistor, which is basically those lights that have the knob or that up and down feature, which essentially dictates the intensity of the light. If you want it super bright or if you want it dim.
The requisite variety really has to do with controlled systems.
Yes, absolutely. First order cybernetics is concerned with mechanisms that you are looking at and that you are constructing and that you are controlling. Second order cybernetics is concerned with the constructor, the observer, and the controller. How do they manage to do it? And that is why second order cybernetics is interesting for cognition. First order cybernetics is not interesting for cognition.
First order cybernetics is concerned with mechanisms that you are looking at, constructing, and controlling. Second order of cybernetics is concerned with the constructor, the observer, and the controller.
And that gets me to something that has made me very unpopular in saying it, that most of what is called artificial intelligence today is based on first order cybernetics. And therefore it's very like behaviorism. It doesn't take into account what the intelligence has to do in order to observe, to construct, to think, to fantasize, and all that.
My understanding is that that is exactly the split that happened in cybernetics, that you had cybernetics and then you had artificial intelligence, which was a continuation
Of first order cybernetics.
rather than in implementation of...
But let it be said that today, and in the last, I would say in the last 10 years, there have been people working in artificial intelligence who are more sophisticated than that, who are getting round to the questions that you have to ask if you want to really model a living organism. Because the living organism is always the perceiver. The living organism is the one that constructs its own perceptions. And they're very often not like the one of the engineer who's trying to design the automaton or the model or the robot.
Because of the variety, there's too much distinction between a living organism because you have to affect the perception of the living organism, or it's, I don't know, because there's a variety of different living organisms, and you get into the question: can an animal observe? Can the animal perceive? Can the animal comprehend? And it's very, very difficult.
I don't want to devaluate first order cybernetics at all. I think some of the things that have come out of it are wonderful. Sure. And we all know it. I mean, I think they have it in refrigerators today. There are chips that are implementations of first order cybernetics. The cars today, with all the automatic braking systems and all those, that's all first order cybernetics. But in order to get a driver of a car, you have to do a little more. You see, you have to get into the second order.
Anything else you want to say about cybernetics?
No, I think it's a widely abused term, you know.
Especially nowadays, because AI, digitization of things, and a variety of other issues. But what I really couldn't find was more examples of the social aspect of things. And I found that very interesting because it's what took me so long to start this video right now was I was looking for far more examples that outreached this confinement of just talking about these systems. Because in reality, what I found more interesting was the fact that controlling data banks, right? Controlling the places that store information, that store concepts, that store ideas. If you can control that, and if you can also control the systems of communications, you can essentially control the world. Because not only can you control the words, the way that they're perceived and the way that they're defined to the observer, but you can also control the discussion around these ideas, around these discussions. And any more than that, I'm already getting into places where I would consider myself getting into trouble, since I am describing the external systems that come together to create the control grid system that we currently live in today, which is very difficult. But just actually making these last six videos, making these last 6 videos has made my writing a bit far more focused, because now I'm starting I'm wording out these concepts, I'm wording out these ideas where I'm beginning to understand, it's different, right? When you say the words, when you're thinking them yourself, but when you start hearing them from yourself, it's been easier for me to build this bigger picture of what really is going on. And if you add the times, if you add the dates of when these things were occurring, don't you think it's very interesting that the Macy's conference was around the same time the Manhattan Project is going on? We also have all this government sponsorship, this government involvement in a variety of different experiments that were all occurring that related to the understanding of systems, the understanding of our social systems, the understanding of, not just our social systems, but everything else, right? They wanted to bridge the divide between all of these great minds in order to work together towards something that was far larger than any one of these people. But it is funny how we are currently living in this future as it is now without really quantifying the effects of these sciences. Quantifying the effects of propaganda in our media, quantifying the effects of certain storytelling devices or certain storytelling techniques, and how they all play out in a variety of different aspects. 28 minutes. I think I could show 2 minutes of this clip that I have where, now this is heavily conspiratorial, since it's going to be a video on Caroline. I don't know if anybody knows what that movie is, but I found a video by Odd TV. I think it's Odd TV that makes this video, where, did I even share it? Very good question. I don't even think I shared it. Well, in this video, it essentially describes that the movie Caroline is using themes and it's using the emotions of its main character in order to lull Caroline into trusting the other world far more than her own world, because the other world, her fantasy world, induces and satisfies things that she isn't receiving from her natural world, her realistic world, the world that she's actually from. So the whole thing with the movie Caroline, it describes that the villain in this movie is trying to appeal to the things that she doesn't have, right? In that sense, basically setting up a control mechanism, because the observer has observed that the patient requires certain things, thus creating the conditions and thus creating the circumstances to appeal to that participant. But, right, that's just a small form factor. If we upscale this and we look at the way that our news, our media, our actors, our movies, our television shows, our entertainment, it even goes so far. It goes so far and so crazy that there was this really old series that I really like. It's called Air Gear. Well, I don't really like it anymore because Air Gear itself suffered from this, where they started putting Obama in the comics. It wasn't just a one-off, like, oh, we're going to have one chapter of Obama. No, Obama takes a center role in this show, or in the manga, because he only appears in the comics, obviously. But in the comics, he becomes an integral role into helping the heroes out in achieving their regalia, or whatever the hell that portion of the story was. But why was Obama needed for that portion? Like, why was Obama needed to be inserted into this story that isn't even big in America? This was far bigger in Japan. Like, what would be the purpose of subliminally putting Obama's face in there and then making him an integral part of saving the world? Like, either way, it went that far, right? Because the entire perception of Obama's administration was completely controlled. Just look at how they handled his pictures and look at how they handled his image overall. Very interesting, the cybernetics field of things. I'm probably going to look for a book myself. I'm probably going to look for Weiner's book and read it for myself to see what it details out there. But these were the leading individuals, the leading minds at the time. And for those who aren't aware of how I discovered the Macy's conference, was through a tarot card designer who designed her cards around the Macy's conference and designed her cards around government conspiratorial ideas. But I've found parallel actors who I consider to be integral to the research, the development, and the research that we would call MK Ultra, since a lot of these things tend to overlap. And when you have the best minds at your disposal, and you have the best minds already working on behalf of some of these ideas, wouldn't it be easy to convince them? Or was it from the very beginning? But again, this goes into very, very dark aspects of our what do we want to call it? Either way. It's very difficult, right? Because I'm over here researching all this, and I've begun to distrust our institutions, our sciences, even our social paradigms, entertainment, a variety of different things. Like, the more I do this research, the more I discover that America is essentially a playground, and there's been a bully who's been forcing everybody to act in a certain way, to promote certain ideas, to live certain ways. And one of their main objectives has always been in either controlling us or finding ways of it being incredibly easy to get rid of us. So, my name is Ramirez. Hopefully you learned something today. Stay tuned more for Frog Bear, and we'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.